that I would necessarily have. It is a moment where you need to have that discussion. The monarchy provides with the Constitution. And
Princess Anne has broken her carefully guarded silence, exposing one of King Charles's most deeply personal final wishes, a revelation that blindsided both Prince William and Prince Harry. In a family shaped by years of quiet tension and carefully maintained distance, the king's request has sent shockwaves through the palace, leaving his sons grappling with a reality none of them were truly prepared to face. The instant Prince Harry stepped through Windsor's gates, alone, the air shifted. Meghan's absence was conspicuous, igniting hushed conversations among staff before a single word of the meeting had been spoken. The couple's decision to send only Harry delivered a message no press release could have matched, loud, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Inside the grand halls, a suffocating silence pressed down on everyone present. King Charles had commanded the gathering, yet the atmosphere was electric with everything left unspoken. Reinforced security lined the corridors, a clear, unmistakable signal that this was no ordinary family occasion. And then came the twist no one anticipated. Charles, the man who always led these moments, had chosen not to speak at all. That burden had been placed squarely on Princess Anne's shoulders.
And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about content.
The break from protocol was jarring, immediate and unmistakable. No one needed it explained. The king, absent from public view for weeks, entered the room carrying the visible weight of his health battles, and there stood Anne. Shoulders squared, expression carved from stone, channeling her brother's gravity with every ounce of composure she possessed. When she finally spoke, her words didn't simply fill the room, they sliced through it. This was not a routine royal briefing, it was a seismic recalibration of the monarchy's future. A transition expected to unfold over years had been violently compressed into mere months. William's face, for just a moment, betrayed everything his composed posture fought to conceal. The crown was coming, and it was coming far sooner than he had steeled himself to accept. From across the room, Harry watched, and for one unguarded heartbeat, his eyes locked with William's. A flash of mutual understanding, wordless and raw, crossed between them. A rare moment of connection bridging the chasm of years. Then the room fractured. Prince Edward, perpetually cast in the role of family peacekeeper, found himself swallowed by a divide too wide for diplomacy to bridge. Even Camilla, typically reserved and measured in these charged moments, broke form, voicing her alarm at the breakneck pace of what was being proposed. The entire family was reeling, but none of this had been a reckless impulse. Charles was fighting on two fronts, against his failing health and against the slow collapse of an institution that could no longer absorb the weight of its own contradictions. In the still hours before dawn, Charles had sat alone with his drafts, rewriting, second-guessing, and returning to the same impossible task night after night. He had chosen Anne with precision and intention. In a family that had long mastered the art of bearing hard truths beneath ceremony, Anne was the one voice he could trust to cut straight to the heart of it. When she finished, the silence that fell over the room was absolute. Even the staff froze, collective breath held in suspension. Because Charles's plan reached far beyond succession, it was a wholesale reimagining of what the monarchy needed to become. Fewer working royals, royal properties open to the public, finances overhauled in ways previous monarchs would never have contemplated. This was no longer about preserving tradition. It was about engineering survival. William would still inherit the crown, but the institution waiting for him would be almost unrecognizable from the one Charles himself had received. The stakes had evolved far beyond titles and ceremony. What now hung in the balance was influence, relevance, and the fundamental question of whether the monarchy could still command meaning in a world that had grown deeply skeptical of everything it represented after everything it had endured.
Britons want Prince William to take the crown when Queen Elizabeth's reign ends.
Charles's decisions were never born in a vacuum. They were forged in the long, turbulent arc of royal history. The abdication crisis of 1936 had shattered the illusion of royal invincibility overnight, hurling an unprepared George VI onto a throne he never sought. and nearly fracturing the institution at its foundations. Then George died young, and a 25-year-old Elizabeth II inherited a burden most people don't encounter until middle age. Charles grew up in her shadow, watching the crown slowly consume her identity, her personal life perpetually subordinated to duty. Power, he learned early, was not glamorous, it was isolating. When Elizabeth died in 2022, after 70 years on the throne, the monarchy lost its last pillar of unquestioned stability, and her reign had quietly been masking the depth of the cracks beneath. And then came Charles's cancer diagnosis. Time suddenly was no longer a luxury. He had spent decades preparing to be king, only to face the real possibility that illness might cut that reign short before it had truly begun. He studied European monarchies that had rushed their transitions and inherited chaos. He was determined not to repeat those mistakes. His focus was singular: the institution's survival above all else. New transparency measures, conversations about returning colonial artifacts, royal estates converted into public housing. And behind palace walls, William was already receiving government red boxes alongside his father. The transfer of power quietly, methodically already underway. William's presence in rooms of real power was expanding with each passing week. Meetings with the Prime Minister, briefings with international leaders. He was not merely observing, he was being shaped, step by deliberate step, into the king he would have to become.
Prince William is match fit for a possible call-up to the top job.
Kate didn't announce her ascent to the center of the monarchy. She simply arrived there, so organically that most barely noticed until she was already indispensable. Where Diana had been ground down by the institution's relentless demands and Meghan had ultimately refused its terms entirely, Kate carved a third path. Adaptive, grounded, and deceptively resilient, she built her role through action, solo engagements, programs championing childhood development and mental health, and the kind of effortless confidence with foreign dignitaries that veteran diplomats quietly respected. She became the steady foundation that both the public and the palace could anchor themselves to. Her relationship with Charles evolved from formal cordiality into something genuinely warm, the king increasingly seeking her counsel on family matters, recognizing in her the steadiness his own marriage had long lacked. Her middle-class background, once a source of courtier snobbery, was now understood as one of her most powerful assets, a living connection between the monarchy and ordinary British life. When Meghan publicly claimed Kate had made her cry during wedding preparations, Kate's response was total, dignified silence. No statement, no rebuttal, just continued visible service. That restraint earned her something press releases cannot manufacture: deep, durable credibility. Her approval ratings routinely outpaced most of the family, including at times William himself. Behind palace walls, she was modernizing royal parenting, earning trust through consistent judgment in private council meetings, and building the family's emotional center from the inside out. And at Charles's coronation, standing beside William, her presence said everything about where the monarchy was heading. Meanwhile, the digital age had fundamentally redrawn the battlefield. Every royal appearance was now instantly dissected by millions. The palace had responded by creating its first royal social media council, a blend of veteran advisors and digital natives monitoring public sentiment around the clock, helping the institution navigate controversy before it could spiral beyond control. Harry inhabits a strange, suspended existence. His body in California, his identity still invisibly tethered to an institution he publicly walked away from. And despite the carefully worded statements that invoke love and family, the relationship between him and William hasn't simply cooled, it has calcified. Years without meaningful contact. The Oprah interview, Spare, with its searing revelations of physical confrontations, unflattering portrayals, and private wounds, aired before a global audience. Palace staff who have served both brothers report that William will not discuss Harry at all. The subject is changed the instant his name surfaces. The anxiety runs deeper still. Insiders suggest unreleased material exists, entire chapters pulled from Spare on legal advice. Some believe Harry holds it in reserve and waiting to gauge what kind of king William becomes. Others think it's a last lifeline toward reconciliation, or leverage for a confrontation not yet ready to be had. Either way, the uncertainty festers within palace walls. And the most consequential shift of all is this: Harry can no longer appeal to his father as the ultimate authority over his standing in the family. That power now belongs entirely to William, and it grows with every passing week. William is not approaching kingship the way his father did, where Charles absorbed conflict quietly, carrying its weight internally. William appears ready to establish firm, unambiguous boundaries from the outset. Palace sources indicate that among his earliest acts as king could be the formal removal of Harry and Meghan's Royal Highness titles they retained but agreed not to use after stepping back. When Meghan was recently referred to by that title in a reposted diplomatic message, it crystallized for William exactly why clarity cannot wait. Those who choose to leave the institution should not continue to trade on its identity. On a broader stage, Charles had already been quietly redefining the monarchy's relationship with Commonwealth nations, not by resisting their gradual departure from British symbolic authority, but by accepting that evolution as both inevitable and potentially regenerative. Rather than fighting to preserve ceremonial leverage over former colonies, the strategy pivoted to genuine partnership, shared interests over historical obligation. William has carried this vision forward through his Commonwealth tours, replacing pomp with purpose, climate initiatives, education partnerships, cultural exchange. The conversations haven't always been comfortable. The younger generation's view of Britain's colonial history carries weight that polished diplomacy cannot simply absorb. But both Charles and William have arrived at the same conclusion: clinging to obsolete power structures only accelerates their unraveling. For a man whose reign has been defined as much by illness as by action, Charles's final wish is not institutional. It is deeply, painfully personal. He doesn't dare hope for full reconciliation between William and Harry. He knows better. What he wants is a crack, a small fragile opening through which communication might one day move again. Those closest to him describe late evenings spent in private, reviewing old photographs of his sons as boys, laughing, unguarded, unburdened by the weight that would later divide them. He never wanted Harry permanently cut off, just as he never wanted the fracture to reach its current depth. Through trusted intermediaries, he has maintained quiet threads of communication even when direct contact became impossible. He believes blood carries obligations that public disputes cannot simply erase. And he wanted to leave behind not just a functioning institution, but a family that had not completely broken apart. As his health declined, that urgency intensified. Princess Anne delivered his message at Windsor with the directness he specifically needed from her, framing it as duty rather than sentiment. But even Anne privately doubted whether sufficient willingness to bridge the divide existed on both sides. His medical team has barred him from direct emotional intervention. So instead, quietly, he has tasked his most trusted advisors with drafting potential pathways to reconciliation, plans locked in a safe in his personal study to be activated only if his condition takes a decisive turn. The monarchy can orchestrate ceremonies and shape narratives, but it cannot legislate forgiveness. And it cannot undo what has been publicly revealed or privately broken. The answer to Charles's final wish now rests entirely with William, and the choice he makes will shape not just family dynamics, but the public perception of the monarchy for a generation.
I don't think that we can ever have peace with my family unless the truth is out there.
Within palace walls, the debate divides into two competing camps. One faction urges a clean surgical break. Titles stripped, succession lines clarified, the monarchy moving forward with only those who chose to remain. The other counsels restraint. Acting too decisively during Charles's health decline risks generating a wave of public sympathy for Harry and Meghan that could prove more damaging than the ambiguity it resolves. Royal historians remind both sides that dynasties fractured by internal division have always paid the heaviest price, but William's ultimate decision remains his alone. And those closest to him report a growing, unmistakable confidence in his own judgment. Charles's final message was never simply a father's plea. It was a test of William's vision, his capacity for nuance, and the kind of king he truly intends to be. King Charles inherited more than a crown. He inherited a monarchy caught at a crossroads. one foot in centuries of tradition, the other being pulled toward a world that demands transparency, accountability, and relevance. The institution, once defined by ceremony and strategic silence, now operates in a media landscape where silence itself is interpreted as indifference. Charles understood this from the moment he ascended. Unlike every monarch before him, he had not risen suddenly to the throne. He had waited decades, watching public opinion shift, watching institutions erode, learning something no previous king had needed to learn: how to lead in an era when leadership itself is perpetually questioned. His vision was always a leaner monarchy: fewer working royals, fewer taxpayer-funded roles, fewer grand spectacles, not as a cost-cutting measure, but as a deliberate act of trust-building. Where Elizabeth II represented continuity, Charles has chosen to represent adaptation. He sees a society that no longer accepts inherited power at face value, that demands institutions earn their place through conduct, not tradition. But reshaping the monarchy is not something he can accomplish alone. William and Kate are now its public face and its future engine. Yet recent health challenges affecting both Charles and Kate have exposed a vulnerability the palace can ill afford. In a media age, absence is never simply absence. It becomes a vacuum, and vacuums are always filled with speculation.
Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother,
Charles has quietly drawn new rules of engagement with the press. Not a declaration of war, but a calibrated restructuring of access. Royal engagements are now shorter, tighter, and more strategically selected. Photographers operate within tighter boundaries. Information flows only when it serves a deliberate purpose. The era of spontaneous royal moments has been quietly retired, replaced by rehearsed, controlled visibility. Harry and Meghan's decision to take their story directly to the world, through Oprah, through Netflix, through memoir, demonstrated something the palace could no longer ignore. Silence was no longer a sufficient defense. The royal family had been forced to respond not with statements, but with sustained, visible behavior, a far harder standard to meet. Charles's answer has been to position himself as the monarchy's final editor. Communications are internally reviewed, leaks are monitored with increasing vigilance. The management of public perception has become as serious as any state matter. But this caution carries a cost. In a world where mystery no longer inspires reverence, where withholding breeds doubt rather than mystique, the balance is razor thin. The king must remain present enough to matter, yet guarded enough to preserve the institution's dignity. His approach so far has been unwavering: modernization through discipline, not disruption; legitimacy earned through responsibility, not charm; a monarchy more muted, more deliberate, and more carefully managed than any that came before it. But for Charles, this was never about performance. And it was about building an institution capable of surviving in a world where nothing is sacred and everything is public. As William stands at the threshold of his reign, one decision looms above all others, and its answer will echo through the monarchy's history long after the palace debates have quieted.